You have 30 seconds to decide, or I marry a stranger and you lose everything. A ruthless duke. A runaway heiress hiding behind a curtain. One midnight deadline that would rewrite both their fates forever. Thunder cracked over the towering windows of Ravenscroft Hall, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the one raging in Julian Ashworth's chest. The 10th Duke of Ravenscroft stood at the top of the sweeping marble staircase, staring down at a ballroom drowning in candlelight, champagne, and razor-sharp ambition. It was the crown jewel of the 1815 London season, and every soul below believed they were celebrating his 30th birthday. Julian knew better. He was watching his own execution. In 38 minutes, the great clock in the entrance hall would strike midnight, and if Julian was still unmarried when it did, the venomous terms of his late father's will would activate instantly. The old Duke had loathed his son's modern convictions and his refusal to be controlled, and from beyond the grave he'd engineered one final act of tyranny: marry by 30, or forfeit it all. The ironworks in Sheffield, the merchant fleet docked at Bristol, the fortune that kept the entire dukedom breathing, every shilling would pass directly to his father's younger brother, Reginald Ashworth, a man ruled by greed and stripped of conscience, who had already vowed to gut the estate, cast out every tenant family, and burn through the inheritance at the gaming tables within a year. Julian straightened the collar digging into his throat, his jaw locked so tight it throbbed. For 3 desperate months he'd searched for a bride, and for 3 months his uncle had poisoned every possibility, bribing fathers, threatening families, wrecking reputations until no respectable household would risk giving up a daughter to a man Reginald had marked for ruin. Every woman on that ballroom floor was married, promised, or forbidden. Near the refreshment table, Reginald swirled his brandy and lifted his glass in a slow, mocking toast, his weathered face gleaming with premature victory. A nervous voice broke from the shadow of the landing. It was Whitmore, Julian's solicitor, gripping a leather case to his chest like armor. "Time is slipping away, Your Grace. Bishop Kensington waits in the private chapel, exactly as arranged. The special license is signed and sealed, it needs only a bride's name." He swallowed hard. "But we have no bride." "I'm aware," Julian said, tearing his eyes from his uncle. "Is there no loophole?" "Nothing Parliament could invoke before the clock turns." "None that could be settled before midnight, Your Grace," Whitmore admitted, his voice shaking. "The moment the register stays empty, Reginald's lawyers seize the deeds by sunrise. He's already stationed magistrates at the front gates." Julian dragged a hand through his hair, the absurdity of it clawing at him. A title centuries old. A fortune that rivaled kings. And still he stood powerless against a clock. He needed a proxy, a woman desperate enough to sign her name and take his title without asking why, and he needed her in under 30 minutes. "Wait for me in the chapel," he told Whitmore, voice dropping low. "I will bring a duchess before that bell finishes ringing, even if I have to drag one from the scullery." He didn't wait for the solicitor's horrified reply. Julian slipped through a hidden servants' passage and cut through the maze of corridors toward the one place guaranteed to be empty during the ball, the East Wing Library, sealed behind heavy oak doors that only his key could open. As he walked, he ran through the names of every maid and companion in the house, knowing full well that marrying a servant would only hand Reginald a fresh scandal to weaponize. It had to be a lady. But there wasn't one left to ask. He reached the library, twisted his key in the lock, and stepped into total darkness, pulling the door shut behind him. For a moment there was only the ticking of the astronomical clock on the mantel. It read 15 minutes past 11. Julian let his back rest against the door and exhaled, the weight of failure pressing down on him, until a sound sliced through the silence. The rustle of silk. A sharply indrawn breath. He was not alone. Years of fencing and boxing took over before conscious thought could catch up. He moved without a sound, eyes adjusting to the moonlight spilling through the tall windows, illuminating dust drifting above rows of leather-bound books and heavy burgundy drapery pooled on the floor. There, a scrape of a shoe against the carpet near his private desk. Someone was crouched behind the curtains. A thief. Or worse, someone Reginald had sent. Julian's hand closed around the small pistol tucked inside his coat, and he crossed the room in near-perfect silence, noting with fury that the locked drawer of his desk had been pried open. He seized the drapery and tore it back. "Show yourself," he snapped, leveling the barrel at the shadows. A startled cry answered him. The intruder tumbled backward, tangled in velvet, and hit the floor, and it was not a hired blade or a common burglar. It was a woman, gasping, fighting to free herself from the curtain. When she finally rose and moonlight found her face, the air left Julian's lungs. She was stunning in a wild, unguarded way, dark copper hair spilling loose from its pins, a gown of faded forest green silk gone threadbare at the hem and smudged with dust. But it was her eyes that held him, fierce, wide, blazing with a defiance that refused to bend even with a pistol pointed at her heart. "Don't shoot," she said, hands raised, chin lifted stubbornly. "Unless you'd like to explain to your guests why you're murdering penniless gentlewomen in your study." Julian lowered the gun, stunned. "Who the devil are you? And how did you get through a locked door?" She brushed dust from her skirts with far too much composure for someone caught red-handed. "Seraphina Hale. And your locks, your grace, are embarrassingly easy to pick." A hairpin and 3 minutes were all it took. The name landed like a stone. Lord Edmund Hale, the former Earl of Thornbury, had died in complete financial ruin 2 years earlier, his estate swallowed whole by creditors, chief among them Silas Pembroke, a notorious predator in London's underworld of debt and blackmail, and a close ally of Julian's own uncle. "The orphaned daughter of the ruined Earl of Thornbury," Julian murmured, studying her dishevelled state. "What could possibly send a piz daughter creeping through my library like a common cut purse?" Something raw flickered across her features before hardening into resolve. "Reclaiming what's mine, your grace. Property Silas Pembroke stole from my family and later sold to you. I purchase a great many things, Lady Seraphina. You'll have to be more specific." "The Thornbury sapphire," she said, jabbing a finger toward the open drawer. "My mother's necklace. Pembroke seized it as collateral for a forged debt after my father died. He had no legal claim to it. I learned only yesterday that he sold it to you to cover his gambling losses. I came to take it back." Julian glanced at his desk, where a velvet case lay open beside the gleaming blue stone, a bridal gift he'd bought a week ago, meant for a bride he no longer had. "You broke into a duke's home over a necklace? Do you understand the penalty for theft, Lady Seraphina? A magistrate would have you on a transport ship by dawn." "I don't care," she shot back, stepping toward him, fear entirely swallowed by desperation. "You don't understand. Pembroke is demanding my hand. He holds what remains of my father's debt. If I can't settle it by morning, he'll force me to the altar, or have me thrown into debtor's prison. That sapphire is the last thing of value my family owns. It's my only way out. I refuse to let a man like him own me." The word struck Julian like a fist. Marriage. Midnight. Debt. Freedom. He studied the fierce, ruined, magnificent woman in front of him, noble blood, desperate circumstances, an unbroken spirit, and she needed rescue exactly as urgently as he did. The mantel clock chimed the half-hour. 28 minutes left. A reckless, brilliant plan snapped into place in his mind. "Lady Seraphina," he said, his voice suddenly level and razor-sharp. "You need that sapphire to erase your debts and escape Pembroke. I need a wife within the half-hour to keep my inheritance from my uncle. It seems fate has locked two desperate people in the same room." He closed the distance between them. "In 28 minutes I lose everything if I remain unmarried. A bishop is standing in my private chapel this very moment holding a license that requires only a signature. My uncle is downstairs counting the seconds until I fail." He lifted the velvet case and held it out to her. "Marry me before that clock strikes 12, and I will not only give you this sapphire, I will erase every debt your father ever carried. You'll have an allowance vast enough to buy Pembroke and sell him back to himself. You'll be the Duchess of Ravenscroft, and no man will ever touch you again. You get your freedom. I keep my legacy. Seraphina went utterly still. You're mad. We're strangers. I broke in here to rob you, and you're handing me a kingdom. We don't need love, Julian said, stepping closer, his voice low and magnetic. We need a marriage. My protection for your signature, nothing more. But we have 26 minutes to make it happen. Walk out that door, and you face Pembroke and a prison cell. Walk to my chapel, and you become one of the most powerful women in England. He extended his hand. Choose. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she pictured Pembroke's leering face, the cold stone of a debtor's cell, and then she looked up into the resolute, storm-dark eyes of the Duke of Ravenscroft. A stranger, yes. But one burning with the same will to survive that lived in her own chest. She placed her trembling hand in his. Take me to the chapel. Julian didn't waste a second. He pulled her toward a hidden panel behind the shelving, pressed a concealed lever, and revealed a narrow servants' corridor. Head down, stay silent, he murmured, lighting a candelabrum. If Reginald or Pembroke spot us before the ink dries, they'll find a way to stop it. She nodded, gathering her ruined skirts, and they hurried through the cramped passage as the muffled swell of a waltz thrummed through the walls. A surreal contrast to the frantic sprint carrying her from thief to duchess in a matter of minutes. Watching Julian's determined stride ahead of her, she felt an unexpected rush of adrenaline cut through her fear. Almost there, Julian whispered, stopping before an iron-banded door. He snuffed the candle and pushed it open onto the Ravenscroft family chapel, ancient stone, 100 flickering beeswax candles, the air thick with incense. Bishop Kensington stood at the altar looking deeply unsettled in his robes, Whitmore beside him practically trembling. The solicitor spun at the sound of the door and gaped at the dishevelled woman on the Duke's arm, hair wild, gown smudged, looking every inch a woman who'd survived a catastrophe rather than a bride. Your Grace, Whitmore stammered. It's 10 minutes to midnight. Who is this? Lady Seraphina Hale. My future wife, Julian said, pulling her straight to the altar without releasing her hand. Bishop, skip the sermon. Go directly to the vows. Whitmore, ready the ink. The bishop blinked at the bride's disordered state. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. I must be certain the lady enters this freely. I am entirely willing, Seraphina said, steady despite her racing pulse, meeting the bishop's eyes without flinching. There is nowhere else I would rather be. Please, proceed. Very well, the bishop said, opening his prayer book with shaking hands. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here. The words blurred past Seraphina as the chapel filled with the drone of the ceremony and the relentless tick of the tower clock above them. Julian's thumb stroked gently over her knuckles, a small anchor amid the chaos, and when she glanced up his jaw was carved from granite, his focus locked on the bishop as if he could will the man to speak faster. To have and to hold, from this day forward, the bishop recited. I do, Julian said instantly, his voice ringing off the stone. And do you, Seraphina, take this man. A violent pounding shook the chapel doors. Julian! Open this door. Reginald's voice tore through the stone, thick with fury. You cannot hide in there. The hour has come. The estate is mine. Seraphina flinched, but Julian's grip only tightened. Ignore him, he told the bishop. Finish it. Now. Do you take this man? The bishop pressed, sweat beading on his brow as the door shuddered under a heavy blow. I do, Seraphina said, her voice cutting clean through the splintering wood. The ring, Whitmore squeaked, thrusting a gold band into Julian's palm. He slid it onto her trembling finger, cold, slightly loose, and impossibly final. By the power vested in me, Bishop Kensington shouted over the crack of the doors finally giving way, I now pronounce you man and wife. The doors burst open. Reginald stood in the threshold, 3 magistrates behind him, his face purpling with rage. Just behind him stood Silas Pembroke, equally livid. Stop this fuss! Reginald bellowed, storming down the aisle. It's midnight. You failed, Julian. Ravenscroft is mine. From the tower above, the first deep chime of midnight rolled out. Julian ignored his uncle entirely. He pulled Seraphina against him and kissed her. Not a chaste, ceremonial touch, but a deliberate, claiming kiss meant for every witness in the room. Her mind went blank under the sudden heat of it as the second chime sounded. He broke away and turned to face his uncle, one arm still locked around her waist, a cold, victorious smile spreading across his face. "You're too late, Uncle," Julian said softly, his voice carrying through the stunned silence as Whitmore blew gently on the drying ink of the register. "May I present to you and to the magistrates you so thoughtfully brought as witnesses, my wife, the Duchess of Ravenscroft." Reginald froze, the colour draining from his face as his eyes flicked from the register to the bishop to the woman at Julian's side. Pembroke shoved past him, recognition dawning through the dust and disorder. "Lady Seraphina," he choked out. "This is impossible. She belongs to me." "She belongs to no one, Pembroke," Julian growled, stepping in front of her, every trace of triumph replaced by lethal protectiveness. "She is my wife. Speak to the Duchess of Ravenscroft that way again, and I will have you thrown in the river myself." The clock kept chiming, each note a hammer blow sealing their fate. Seraphina trembled against her new husband's side, disbelief washing through her. They had won. But as the final chime faded and she looked up into the unreadable eyes of the stranger she'd just bound herself to for life, a chilling truth settled over her: the legal war was finished, but the real danger, the unpredictable intimacy of belonging to a powerful man who now held her deepest secrets, had only just begun. Morning light broke through the heavy gold curtains of the Duchess's chambers at Ravenscroft Hall, spilling across the canopy bed in long dusty beams. Seraphina jolted awake, pulse hammering as the events of the night crashed back, the break-in, the ticking clock, the vows rushed out over splintering doors, the branding heat of Julian's kiss. She clutched the sheets to her chest. She was no longer a penniless orphan dodging creditors. She was Seraphina Ashworth, Duchess of Ravenscroft. A soft knock preceded a young maid carrying a tray of chocolate, warm scones, and the morning paper. Behind her walked Julian, immaculate in dark grey wool, looking every inch the man who'd conquered his enemies at midnight, except for the shadows beneath his eyes, proof of a sleepless night. "Leave us," he told the maid. Once the door shut, his gaze settled on Seraphina. "Good morning, Your Grace. I trust the bed was kinder than my library floor." She flushed, drawing the sheet higher. "Considerably. Though I half expected to wake in a cell. Did your uncle truly yield?" Julian's easy expression vanished. He pulled a chair beside the bed and sat, forearms braced on his knees. "Reginald doesn't yield. He retreats and reloads. Whitmore spent the night securing the register at the record office. At dawn, we received word, my uncle and Silas Pembroke have filed a petition with the Crown to have our marriage annulled on grounds of fraud." Her stomach dropped. "Fraud?" Pembroke went straight to the runners, Julian said, voice low and hard. "He claims you broke into my home to steal the Thornbury sapphire, that I caught you and you seduced or blackmailed me into marriage to dodge the gallows. Reginald is arguing I'm unfit and you're a common criminal. There's a hearing before the magistrate tomorrow. If they believe it, the marriage is voided, my estate passes to Reginald, and you hang for grand larceny." Cold panic flooded her. She'd survived one nightmare only to be dragged into another. "But you paid for that sapphire." "Pembroke stole it from my father first." "I know it, and you know it," Julian said, taking her trembling hand, his grip warm and steadying. "But the court demands proof. Pembroke forges ledgers for a living, he has papers showing your father owed £10,000 and that the jewel was seized legally. We have nothing but your word against a wealthy man's documents." He paused. "Why would your father hand over an heirloom for a simple debt? He wasn't a careless man." Seraphina stared at the lace bedding, a tear slipping free. "It wasn't a gambling debt. My father was investigating Pembroke. He believed Pembroke was defrauding the royal shipyards, swapping rotten timber for sound oak and pocketing the difference. My father found proof. A ledger. Before he could bring it to Parliament, Pembroke cornered him, threatened my life, and demanded it. He took the sapphire as a trophy to guarantee my father's silence. 2 days later my father's heart gave out, and Pembroke claimed the debt was never paid. Julian's eyes sharpened with sudden, predatory focus. Treason. He committed treason against the crown. He stood, pacing. If your father handed over the ledger, Pembroke likely destroyed it, but a man like that keeps leverage close. He turned toward the velvet case on the vanity, holding the sapphire. Seraphina, when you broke into my study, why not simply grab the necklace and run? Why were you taking apart the case? She blinked, the memory rushing back. Because the stone is beautiful, but it isn't what my father hid. The jeweler who said it was known for hidden mechanisms, the silver backing opens. On his deathbed, my father told me he never gave Pembroke the real ledger. He gave him a forgery, and hid the true bank drafts, the ones bearing Pembroke's forged signature, inside the sapphire's casing. Silence stretched 5 long seconds before a slow, dangerous smile broke across Julian's face. My brilliant Duchess. Get dressed. We're going to destroy them both. The King's Bench chamber was airless with heat, packed to the rafters with London's most powerful families. The scandal had spread through the city like fire. The Duke of Ravenscroft, married at midnight to a penniless, thieving orphan. It was the talk of the decade. Reginald stood at the plaintiff's table, barely containing his glee. Beside him, Silas Pembroke wore a sombre suit and an expression of wounded dignity. Magistrate Reginald boomed, the facts speak for themselves. My nephew, unhinged by the pressure of his inheritance, was preyed upon by this desperate woman. She was caught in the act, attempting to steal a jewel worth thousands. This marriage mocks the law itself, a criminal's bargain to dodge the noose. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Seraphina sat beside Julian in deep sapphire velvet, spine straight, betraying nothing of the fear churning beneath her calm. Lord Pembroke, the magistrate said, peering over his spectacles, you swear this lady stole the gem? Pembroke rose, bowing his head. I do, Your Honour. The Thornbury sapphire was rightfully mine, taken as collateral for her late father's debts. I sold it to his grace in good faith. Lady Seraphina, driven by greed, tried to steal it back. A compelling story, Julian said, rising, his voice silencing the room. Except that Lord Pembroke is a liar, an extortionist, and a traitor to the crown. The gallery gasped. Reginald turned scarlet. Objection! This is slander. Julian ignored him, walking to the center of the chamber with the velvet case in hand. Magistrate, my wife did not enter my study to steal a jewel. She entered to reclaim stolen property. Property Lord Pembroke extorted from her father to conceal a massive fraud against the Royal Navy. Absurd, Pembroke snapped, composure cracking. He has no proof. A desperate man defending a fraudulent bride. No proof. Julian arched a brow, opening the case and lifting the great blue stone. Lord Pembroke claims this was mere collateral, but he was too arrogant to inspect his prize closely. He turned to Seraphina and nodded. She rose, every eye tracking her as she crossed to his side and took the pendant. Her thumbnail found the hidden seam along the silver backing and pressed. With a sharp click, it sprang open, and a collective gasp swept the chamber as she drew out 2 tightly folded squares of vellum, handing them to Julian. Magistrate, Julian said, voice ringing through the room, I present the original bank drafts from the Royal Shipyards, signed by Silas Pembroke, authorizing condemned timber to be billed to the Crown as premium oak. The difference, over £50,000, was deposited into accounts held by Lord Reginald Ashworth. Reginald's knees buckled. Pembroke lunged for the doors, but 2 Bow Street runners Julian had quietly arranged that morning caught him and dragged him back. These drafts, Julian continued mercilessly, laying the vellum on the magistrate's desk, were hidden by the late Earl of Thornbury. Pembroke threatened Lady Seraphina's life to keep him silent. My wife did not break into my home to rob me. She came to clear her family's name and expose a traitor. The magistrate examined the drafts, fury hardening his expression. Guards, take Lord Pembroke and Lord Ashworth into custody for fraud, extortion, and high treason against the Crown. The chamber erupted. The gallery roared as the two men were shackled and dragged out, Reginald screaming curses, Pembroke weeping openly. Julian turned his back on them both and looked down at Seraphina, the fierce duke melting into a man visibly undone by the woman before him. "You did it," she whispered, a tear of relief sliding free. "No," he corrected gently, cupping her face. "We did it." He didn't care that hundreds of eyes still watched or that the chamber still roared with noise. He pulled her into his arms, holding her fiercely. "The bargain we struck at midnight," he murmured against her hair. "My protection for your signature. Has it run its course?" She pulled back to search his eyes. "Has it, Your Grace?" "It has," he said softly, thumb tracing her lower lip. "Which means I have a new question for you. Will you stay, Seraphina? Not as a proxy, not as a shield against my uncle, but as my wife. Because in the last day, I've learned the title means nothing if you aren't beside me to share it." Her heart soared, every last trace of fear burning away beneath his gaze. "I will stay, Julian," she vowed, voice steady and full of sudden, fierce love. "Until the end of our days." He kissed her then, not as a performance to defeat an enemy, but as a genuine promise, a bond forged in desperation, tested by danger, and destined to become the love story London would never stop talking about.